Welcome to the show, IB Nation Sports Talk, off and rolling. Another day goes by. Notre Dame remains independent, in the college football world. I guess it's, largely intact. Glad to have you with us here today. We're starting to show off a little differently today. Jesse's going to be here in a little bit for some predominantly rapid fire topics, including a couple would you rather Notre Dame questions. You want to hear them, I think, coming up. They'll twist your brain just a little bit. But we've got Ryan with us today. Ryan Roberts, of course, our recruiting guy. I'm sure more people are probably familiar with you than they are with me. You've been here for a while now. I'm just going into my 5th week of doing this show. But we were just talking before we started things off, when I was doing my radio show, you had just you'd been on for what, maybe 4 or 5 weeks or something like that. At the most, probably. We were just starting to get into a little bit of groove, and then things kind of changed. But this is the first time that you and I have actually done anything together here. So we're face to face. Glad to have you for the first time here.
I appreciate it, Sean. I think it was just meant to be, man, that we were supposed to be on the same team at some point, So it's easy transition. Yep.
That's exactly right. I see we've got some recruiting questions starting to pop up. I'll keep an eye and, see if maybe we can throw some stuff in. But again, we'll be kind of going double barrel with Ryan to start things off, and then Jesse will be in. Again, we've got plenty of Notre Dame football topics in our rapid fire and some NFL. We've actually got our way too early Super Bowl picks. 7 months from today is the Super Bowl, so I like to do, since it's like the middle of July, I like to do these 7-month out way too early Super Bowl picks. So we've got ours coming up in rapid fire in a little bit. So we've got that. An insanely busy, last couple of months. Oh, I guess before we get started on the recruiting, I've got to do the official, reminder. Like us on YouTube, subscribe to us on YouTube. Be sure you do that because it helps us out quite a bit. Just hit that like button. Plenty of people are, getting into the habit of doing that. And it really helps us out, helps publicize the show. And on the podcast platforms, be sure to follow, and comment and rate and all that good stuff as well. I was just starting to say, though, Ryan, it's been an insanely busy last month or so, in terms of recruiting. It's one of the busier June, Julys I can really remember in a long time. Have you even had time to catch your breath, with all that's been going on here recently?
Well, it was a good little break. I went to Myrtle Beach last week for the week. So I was still doing some stuff, but I was untapped a little bit. After we had those 5 commitments in 6 days, it was pretty wild, man. And then luckily I missed the Dante Moore fiasco when he committed to Oregon. I know that was a hot topic last week. So it's been wild though, man. I was talking to Brian the other day, I thought, end beginning of July into the middle of July, I thought there would be kind of a little bit of a lull, I didn't think that I thought I was going to have to get a lot more creative with the content, but it's not slowing down. It's a different time, obviously, with transfer portal and NIL and Marcus Freeman obviously doing his thing at top of the program. So it's keeping me busy, to say the least, but it was nice to get away for a couple of days.
Yep, for sure. And it sounds like you and Brian covered a lot of the quarterback stuff in terms of recruiting earlier today. Maybe we can touch on that here in a little bit, but we don't have to go. I kind of came up with some more, maybe macro type questions, popping through my head today. Some of them came up on our show yesterday, but one thing that's coming up here in a couple of weeks is the big recruiting barbecue, which is, it sounds like it's starting to become an annual tradition for Notre Dame, the summer recruiting barbecue. What maybe are you expecting there when that pops up a couple weeks from now?
Yeah, it's set for the July 26th, which is a little weird because I believe that is a Tuesday, if I remember correctly. It would be Tuesday because today's the 12th, right? So it would be 2 weeks exactly from today. And it's a really cool event, Sean. It's tailored a lot more to the 2024 kids, so the kids that are going into their junior seasons of high school football. So 2023, there will be a couple kids that'll be on campus, uncommitted kids, but for the most part, they're really trying to kind of center everything around 2024. So you should expect, and if you're on the premium message board, if you're not, you can go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can check out, we have a running list of the visitors that we are expecting to be at the barbecue. I'll give a little teaser, all 5 commits currently in the class, including CJ Carter, expected to be on campus. You got guys like Peter Jones, who's the top rated offensive lineman in 2024. Justin Scott, who's out of Chicago, big defensive tackle, 6'5", 310 pounds. And we have a few more guys as we continue to verify people coming on campus. Obviously, it's 2 weeks from now again, so there's going to be kind of names trickling in on that list, but you can keep up to date with everything that's happening there. And it's just a really nice, I think it's a really nice event, obviously, for meshing of, committed and uncommitted players in 2024. But it's also, I think, a nice little kind of preview of what to expect for 2024. 2023 has been great. Already 5 commitments in 2024. I think Notre Dame has a really good opportunity to have back-to-back top 3 classes, and you're going to kind of see some of the names in 2024 that you need to know.
Now, it's interesting you said top 3 because I saw today, I think it's roughly 42% of the top targets in this 2023 cycle are still out there, 42%, maybe the top 100 or something like that. So, Notre Dame has been sitting at number 1 for a long time, and they've kind of fluctuated even in the last few days. It's like Ohio State gets a commit, Notre Dame gets a commit. They've been going back and forth a little bit. So all that said, what do you think they have a chance to end up number 1, or is 2 or 3 maybe, kind of more realistic for them, in the long run by the time December rolls around?
Yeah, I think somewhere 2 to 4-ish, 2 to 5-ish is probably a more realistic opportunity. I mean, when we were kind of predicting, because I do think at one point Notre Dame had a really good chance at getting the number 1 class, and I wouldn't still discount it depending on how kind of other teams' boards end up shaking out. But I mean, not having Dante Moore in the class was obviously a big blow for Notre Dame, right? He's a top 10 player in the class, 5-star recruit. Jason Moore just opted for Ohio State, the great defensive lineman out of DeMatha Catholic in Maryland. So there's been a couple hits to Notre Dame recruiting where it's getting a little tougher to project to number 1. I don't think it's impossible, but I just think that right now it's more than likely we're looking at a top 3 to 5 class, which, Notre Dame's going to pull in a great class. It's just when you don't have the 5-star quarterback to kind of buoy it, sometimes it's a little tough to finish number 1, but I think Notre Dame still has an opportunity to be in the conversation until the end, at least.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I think some people might end up being disappointed with that after writing it number 1 for so long. But as it's like they for a long time obviously had more commits than a lot of other schools. So I think, that kind of weighted that number 1. But, even to be right in there, 1, 3, 4, whatever it happens to be, I think that's still going to be really good. This is going to be a really good class, regardless of what the ranking ends up being.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a, and I know Brian kind of coins this thing, but right. So gap closing, but I think this is a gap closing class. I mean, when you're talking about the 4 defensive linemen that they have committed in the class, including Keon Keeley and Devin Houston and Brennan Vernon and that talented group, Boubacar Traore. And then you talk about the 5 offensive line class, the wide receiver group that they have the potential to pull out, this defensive back group. It's a really great class, man. And I think that they have, despite Dante Moore going to Oregon, I think they have a chance to still pull in a really talented quarterback, which I know we're going to kind of briefly talk about a little bit, but it's a gap closing class, and it is a great debut, I think, for Coach Freeman and his staff, to say the least.
Well, let me ask you about, you mentioned CJ Carr, and there's all the, obviously everyone's, or at least a lot of people disappointed that Dante Moore ended up at Oregon. But, as disappointing as that is, I was thinking about this. Like, if you're Michigan and you get these 2 guys, Moore and Carr, slip right out of your backyard. One of them's going to Notre Dame, the other's going to Oregon. Like, if you're Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, having these guys walk right out of your backyard, you've got to be feeling even worse, I think, right now, don't you?
Yeah, I posted a little video. I went on a podcast the other day. It was an Ohio State-based podcast, and we talked a little bit about that because the one thing that you have in common with Ohio State fans is you both don't like Michigan, right? I mean, you both dislike Michigan heavily, and I think my phrase on there was it's a good time to be a Michigan hater. Like, if you do not like the University of Michigan, it's not great right now, Sean. Like, it's not. I mean, missing Dante Moore, there were other factors there, and I can't really talk too much about it because Notre Dame also technically missed on Dante Moore, right? But the fact that they missed out on Lloyd Carr's grandson. Like, that is a big thing, man. Like, I mean, talk about having the inside track on a kid. And it was never even in the conversation. I mean, he liked Michigan, but he was always Notre Dame. Like, CJ Carr had liked Notre Dame for several months before he had made his commitment. I mean, he thought about committing earlier in the year. So it's something where it's kind of been that way for a while. And I mean, I would like Michigan, because I do not like them, but I would like them to be a relevant football team. Like, I want them to be a good program. I don't want them to be a great program just because of my distaste for them. But I want good programs that have stay power to be good. I mean, I think that makes college football just a better product. But unfortunately, Coach Harbaugh flirting with the NFL openly and doing all that type of stuff, because, I mean, they're just in the playoffs and they have zero recruiting momentum right now. And I think it's kind of symbolized by the fact that you had 2 5-star recruits in 2023 and 2024 in Michigan in your backyard, and you weren't able to close on either one of them. And one is a legacy to your school as well. So it's not great for the University of Michigan right now.
Yeah, absolutely. But so they just offered the Novosad. Is that how you say it? Novosad, from the kid from Texas. So give us some of your thoughts on him.
Yeah. So just offered Austin Novosad yesterday. So he is out of the state of Texas. He has a pretty good relationship with Braylon James, who is committed to Notre Dame right now, the wide receiver. And then he's also has a good relationship with Jaden Greathouse, who Notre Dame may be getting a commitment from on Friday. They play on the same 7-on-7 team. So they have a pretty good relationship. He's a guy, Sean, by all indications, and we just had John Garcia on earlier on the show, who was at the Elite 11, and Austin had a great showing there, and he's a 4-star player, and he committed to Baylor right now. But we think that his ranking, and I think 247 even said, like, yeah, his ranking's getting bumped right now. Like, he's done a great job. And recently, Ohio State's getting in the fold. Texas A&M's getting in the fold. He's a player that he's not making it known per se that he's a flippable player, but like you can kind of read the tea leaves, and because he committed to Baylor very early, and now he's getting some major high-end Power 5 offers, right? So Notre Dame's getting in the conversation there. And I mean, I compare him to Jared Goff on the show earlier from a stylistic perspective. Like, he's not the fleetest of foot, but he's just a really nice processor, gets the ball out quickly, has a pretty strong arm. I think he's a really good football player. He's just a good player. Is he Dante Moore? No, not in my opinion. But he is a good player, and he is out of the state of Texas, which I think, again, if you're creating a pipeline to Texas where you could have 4 guys in the class if Jaden Greathouse commits on Friday, and then potentially a 5th with Austin Novosad, then I think you're in a pretty good spot overall.
Yep, for sure. So, they've got Tyler Buckner. They've got Angeli, obviously, in this incoming class. We got to see a little bit of him in the spring. They've got Carr coming in 2024. So the importance... how important is it for them to get another quarterback in this cycle, in this incoming 2023 cycle, do you think?
Well, I think that you always want to bring in a quarterback every cycle. And You're looking at it, and like Drew Pine is set to graduate after this next year. And is he a player that if Tyler Buckner wins the starting spot and he is doing a great job, is he a guy that wants to just sit behind Tyler Buckner for the foreseeable future? Or does he want to take the next step and maybe transfer out? And we don't necessarily think that he is, but it's just there's an assurance that needs to be kind of taken into account, right? Like, we need to replenish this depth chart, because after 2023, in that sense, if let's say a Drew Pine transfers, you're down to 2 scholarship quarterbacks and walk on Ron Powlus III. Like, you need to make sure that you have that assurance in the quarterback room. So taking one in 2023, I think, is a must, and I do think that they are going to. People keep asking about it, Sean, but like, I looked up, and the last 20 cycles, including 2022, Notre Dame has not taken a quarterback in a cycle one single time in 20 years. So like, you always want a quarterback in the class. That's a very abnormal thing to happen. So I think ultimately they do end up with a 2023 quarterback, and then that'll be a nice bridge to, obviously CJ Carr already in the 2024 class.
There's been the talk about Carr reclassifying. Do you think there's any chance that actually happens?
It's been something that's been talked about. I think that I don't think CJ necessarily wants to do it. I don't think people on his side definitely want to do it. Honestly, it's something where he's a really impressive player from a mental perspective. So I think he could make the jump. And I actually think he's a little older for his class. I think he's already 17. So he's a player that I think could potentially make it happen. But I'm not a big advocate of reclassifying in general, to be honest, what position you play. Sure. I mean, we talked about earlier on the show. I mean, I can think of plenty of cases where it hasn't worked out really. I mean, Quinn Ewers, we'll see what he is at Texas. He reclassified. JT Daniels has not really had that step. You know, he's kind of been in and out of the lineup with injuries over the last couple of years. And now he's at the University of West Virginia. We'll see what happens there. But then I even think like Tony Grimes, who was a 5-star cornerback that went to North Carolina a year early. And he's been a good to solid player, but I don't think it's helped his development kind of taking that reclassification. So I think that for me, in my opinion, and I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't think it actually is, but I think that stick for 2024 is probably the best for CJ Carr.
Okay. We had this question pop up in the YouTube chat. Can Steve Angeli, this is from Irish Chi-Town, can Angeli be a solid backup for Tyler, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I will say this. I did not have many expectations for Steve, but then I saw him during the spring practice, the availability we had, and I thought he looked good. I mean, like, he's a smooth kid, doesn't seem to get rattled much, pretty accurate. So yeah, I think he could definitely be a backup. There's no doubt. I think the question about Steve is, what is the ceiling for him? Because I think he does have a relatively high floor. So if you told me that, if Drew Pine leaves and next year you're Tyler Buckner, Steve Angeli, and then an incoming freshman in the Ron Powell, and you told me that Steve Angeli's his backup, I'd be fine with it. I mean, I think he has capabilities to be a very good backup. I don't think there's any. I think it's easy for that kind of transition.
Okay, so a couple questions that kind of popped up during the show that we were, when Vince and I were doing yesterday, and of course we don't do recruiting like you do recruiting. So you're our expert. You're the guy to ask. So with all the conference talk and the realignment stuff going on the past couple weeks, have you had any indication from recruits that it's had any impact on their decisions about, whether or not they'll commit, those kind of things, any hesitations at all, just, with things sort of being up in the air with not just Notre Dame, but obviously with other schools as well?
Yeah, now it's a fascinating question. I would say I haven't personally heard anything. I know we've talked a lot about, especially when Dante was getting ready to commit to Oregon, does conference realignment and maybe Oregon being on the outside looking in, does that affect his decision? I think it will for some players. Like, I absolutely do. I think some recruits will be very hesitant because they'll be like, I don't know what the long-term future and long-term outlook of the program is from a conference realignment perspective. But I also think that we don't 100% know what the conference realignment is going to look like, right? Like, we're still kind of, we think it's going to be 2 super conferences, but what if it changes? I just think there's too much of an unknown right now where I don't think it's going to affect as much right now. Some kids, I think it'll sway maybe back and forth a little bit, but I think it's more when we have more of a concrete understanding of what the conference realignment is 100% going to look like, then that's where I think it'll start to kind of alter decision-making, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that does. That makes a lot of sense. Another one then that came up, let's say this, I was kind of intrigued by this. I have my opinion about it. I'll see what you have to say. Let's say Notre Dame loses a lopsided game to Ohio. Again, this came up. This was a question we were asked specifically yesterday. So let's say Notre Dame loses lopsided game to Ohio State, and then they lose 2 to 3 more games, so they're 9-3, 8-4, which again, I don't think is going to happen. But do you think they lose any commits as a result of that kind of scenario?
I don't think so. I think if anything, if there are players that Notre Dame is going into the season kind of playing the long game with that are more fall commits, and you get off to a slow start, and maybe you don't have a good showing at all against Ohio State, I think it could halt recruiting, and I think that it can maybe make the battle for some players down the stretch more difficult, because I know there are, for a fact, some players, not even just in Notre Dame's case, but this is just in the case of new coaching changes in general, there are some players that want to see the on-field product, and rightfully so, right? Like, you want to see what the coaches are doing, what position you're going to be playing, kind of the long-term outlook for a spot, right? So I think that there is going to be a lot of eyes, especially on that first game in the Horseshoe. I think a lot of people have expectations that they want to see from that side of things, Sean. Like they want to see what it looks like tangibly from a Marcus Freeman coach team. But I don't think that it's going to alter the kids that are on the table right now, because I do think that, I mean, decommitments happen once in a blue moon. So I'm not going to say it's a definite that it will 100% not happen. But I think for the most part, these players took the plunge without knowing what the on-field is going to 100% look like. They are there because they know, because they believe in Coach Freeman. They believe in what Notre Dame can provide for them. They believe in the long-term outlook, the 4 for 40, all those good things. So I think it's more for the uncommitted players and the future classes more than anything. I think the 19 recruits that Notre Dame has, 19 commitments, I should say, in the 2023 class, I don't think it's going to hinge a lot on that Ohio State show. And I think it's more from an outside perspective.
Yep, I agree. I agree with that. You know, one of the other recruiting philosophies Brian Kelly had was they were only going to take commitments from guys who, you know, weren't going to change their minds later on, you know, that kind of thing, and end up decommitting. It's like, if you're going to commit, you're going to commit, so that we're not, you know, looking around and, you know, we get these late decommitments and stuff like that. Are you seeing anything different, you know, with Marcus Freeman running things now? You know, any different philosophy along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this a lot. I think Marcus Freeman has really widened the scope for what a Notre Dame fit could be, right? Like I think there's been in previous staffs where they hone in on Catholic schools in this part of the world, part of the country, right? Like this is kind of this is what a typical Notre Dame player comes from. This is what a typical Notre Dame player looks like. And I think Marcus Freeman's kind of really widening the scope and trying to find fits maybe in uncommon areas, right? Like I think that's a big thing for where this program is going. So I do believe that Marcus Freeman is also open, because we've talked a lot about like Keon Keeley after he committed. We knew that he was going to take, you know, unofficial visits to other schools. Like we knew that the visit schedule was going to kind of be intact. So, sure. And I don't think that scared Mark. I don't think that scares Marcus Freeman. I think that he understands that people want to go through their process. Recruits want to go through their process. But as long as you keep selling what your program is and you keep selling what brought the interest in the first place, then I don't think there's a huge threat in that regard, right? So I think what Coach Freeman's done is really opening up the scope of what a Notre Dame football player looks like and being confident in yourself. Like, I don't think Notre Dame's afraid. I'll put it like this. I think past staffs were afraid to lose a player, but I think Coach Freeman thinks of it as competition. I think he thinks of it as, I'm not going to be afraid of this battle for a player, if that makes sense. So I don't think he worries too much about what others are doing. I think he is focused on what his program can bring, and I don't think he's going to back down from any of those competitions for great football players and great people.
All right. Sounds good. Well, I know you were on for a while earlier today, and you're obviously doing a lot of recruiting talk every day with Irish Breakdown. So, you know, like I said, hadn't had the chance to have you on yet, and kind of seemed like a good time with everything that's been going on with recruiting and, you know, some of these other questions that have been popping up during our show as well. And you're the guy to answer those much more than me. So I appreciate you stopping in today, Ryan. It's great to talk to you. Great to see you. Glad you had a good vacation, and you know, like they were kind of giving you a hard time here in the chat. You're more than making up for it already this week, jumping in and staying busy, but a lot of great information.
Well, I appreciate it, Sean, and I have to make up for it, man. I missed the whole week of work. I know, you know, I pulled an extra duty today, Brian. I know he's down there in the chat, so I'm just putting it out there, man. I'm here. I'm balling out here. Appreciate you, though.
Yep. All right. Take care, Ryan. We'll talk to you later. All right. So again, we kind of switch things up a little bit. Usually we start, you know, like with Vince, Jesse, Bobby, those guys, and you know, then kind of come in and shift topics if we have a guest or what, you know, that kind of thing. But we thought, hey, let's start off with Ryan with some recruiting talk today. So what I'm going to do now, though, is get out of some recruiting talk, and I'm going to bring Jesse in. Jesse is we've got some more Notre Dame topics coming up for you, including, you know, we're going to start off with a couple of would you rather questions, and I'll be interested to see what you think about our would you rather. There, a couple of them related to Notre Dame. We've got some Quentin Nelson, Zach Martin talk, rated the 2 top interior offensive linemen in the NFL, or way too early Super Bowl picks. So we've got a lot of stuff coming up. So let's just bring him in right now. So we're going to do a little bit of rapid fire now with Jesse Styers jumping in. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's the day before my vacation, so
Yes.
I'm eager to get this done and get packed up and ready to catch my flight tomorrow morning.
What's the temp in Phoenix right now where you're headed?
112 degrees. I think
Whew.
the average is going to stay above 110 for the rest of the week. I already got my sweat rag packed with me.
I bet. Will you just live in the swimming pool down there? Is that the plan?
Yeah, I mean, the plan is to we have a nice Airbnb. We're going to stay in the pool as long as possible. And then when evening time comes around, we'll head out to the clubs. So
that's the way to go.
Trying to stay as cool as possible.
Yes. Well, good luck with all of that. Big bachelor party weekend down there in Phoenix. How many other guys are coming down for the weekend?
So there will be 6 more, 7 in total. So yeah, 7 of us for a bachelor party in the middle of July in Phoenix, Arizona. I don't see anything that could go wrong.
No, not at all. Not at all. Will there be any golfing while you're down there?
No time for golfing /
Okay.
Not everyone is good at golf.
Yeah.
I think
gotta get the important stuff in.
Yeah, the hanging out by the pool, having a couple pops.
Yeah, that's right. All right, well, we've got plenty of topics to get to today, so let's just jump right in here. I've got a couple of hopeful sort of brain twisters for you. I like to see if I can make it hurt a little bit. I got a couple of would you rather questions for Notre Dame football. So let's start with this. With all this conference realignment talk and everything going on, would you rather see Notre Dame join the Big Ten full-time and be guaranteed one national championship in, say, the next 15 to 20 years, or stay independent, but you don't know if they will ever win a national championship again? Which way are you going here? Join the Big Ten, you're guaranteed a championship in the next 15 or 20 years. Stay independent, you don't know if you'll ever win one again.
For me, it's all about guaranteeing the national championship. We all know Notre Dame hasn't won since 1988. That in itself is 98-08. That's 34 years right now, going on 34 years. I would take a national championship no matter what. It's important to get that off your belt. And if that means joining the Big Ten, I think that's the obvious answer. I don't think you can go on and nothing in life is certain, nothing in life is guaranteed. But if you could be guaranteed a national championship in the next 15 or 20 years after not winning a championship for 34 years, I think that has to be the obvious answer.
I think this is it's kind of the ultimate test, right? For, like all the, especially the diehard, we've got to stay independent. We're independent forever and all that. And I mean, like if you weigh all the factors in this, okay, you're going to join the Big Ten. If you join the Big Ten, you're going to get cut a check for around $100 million a year. So automatically, you're more than tripling your TV revenue right now. Now you don't know what the next TV contract is going to be for Notre Dame, but as of right now, you're basically quadrupling it. Actually, I guess, because it's around $25 billion in total right now. So you're going to get more TV money, and you're going to get to play Michigan more often. You're going to get Ohio State in there. You don't know exactly what the schedules are going to look like, but you're going to get your Penn State back on the schedule and stuff like that. So you're going to have, I think, a more attractive schedule for the home fans. Now again, you're going to be regionalized to some extent, but I think like all these different factors, if the quote unquote consolation prize for Notre Dame fans, even the most ardent, we've got to stay independent forever, alumni, fans, and everybody else, if the consolation prize is, hey, you're guaranteed a national championship, because everybody talks about that's the goal, right? Win a national championship. I think you've got to take that trade-off. I still say stay independent as long as possible, but if you're guaranteed that national championship, because I think I asked the question around a year ago on my radio show, I think it was like around this time last year, you are guaranteed to win a national championship in, like in the next 20 years, I think it was. And then, no, you win a national championship, but then you're going to go at least 20 years without winning another one. Would you take it? And it's pretty much unanimous. Everybody said yes. So you play for national championships. That's what Notre Dame is all about. I think you've got to take that trade-off. You take the trade-off that you get yourself a national championship, even if it means you have to join the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame fans have made it very clear that, 10, 11 win seasons isn't the ideal goal anymore. The goal is to take that next step and to win a national championship. So I would be hands in, all in for anything that would get me that national championship.
Yeah. So that was maybe easier than I thought it was going to be. Did that bend your brain at all? Like, did you even have to think about that one at all? Or did you just, hey, you're guaranteed a championship, of course you've got to take it?
My thought rationale is I think Notre Dame, we talked about this last week. I think Notre Dame's going to stay as independent as long as possible. But at the end of the day, I think they're going to end up joining the Big Ten. So that kind of took it off the table for me. And then when you throw in a national championship, I think that just about seals the deal, in my opinion.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does seem fairly inevitable, just the way things are pointing right now. I think the interesting thing, and I don't think you and I got to talk about this last week. No, we didn't. The interesting thing, there was a little thing on an ESPN.com story that Notre Dame and Jack Swarbrick have an ally in Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, because Sankey knows Notre Dame's not going to join the SEC, and different reasons for that. One of them being the Big Ten has different academic standards across the board compared to the SEC. The payouts are roughly the same. Also now with Los Angeles, USC, and UCLA being in the Big Ten, Notre Dame becomes more national. You've got the East Coast schools and the West Coast schools. So it just makes more sense for Notre Dame. But Greg Sankey, according to this thing on ESPN.com, is an ally for Jack Swarbrick and Notre Dame in terms of the independence, because helping them maintain their path to the college football playoff, which, as we know, is one of the prerequisites for Notre Dame being able to keep its independence. So Greg Sankey would essentially, try to help Notre Dame keep its independence by keeping a path for Notre Dame to the college football playoff in the next college football playoff agreement, simply because of the fact he doesn't want Notre Dame joining the Big Ten, because it would help out the Big Ten too much in terms of their impact and their pull by having Notre Dame and that brand in there. So I found that very interesting, that even though Notre Dame wouldn't necessarily be joining the SEC would be an ally of Notre Dame, trying to help Notre Dame keep its independence and keep that path to the playoff, to keep them, it's kind of like, just kind of like a defensive move, I guess, keep them from joining the Big Ten. I found that interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting and something I hadn't heard before, but obviously it boils down to the SEC wants to stay above the Big Ten at all costs. And if the Big Ten can acquire UCLA, USC, and Notre Dame all in one swoop, the SEC is going to have a hard time keeping up without making additions on their own. So it definitely makes sense, but it all comes back to, the main thing that we keep hitting on is that Notre Dame seems to have the leverage in all of these situations, no matter what route they want to do, no matter what route they want to go, and they have allies no matter what route they want to go. So I think those are big, important factors. I don't think at the end of the day there's such thing as Notre Dame losing in this scenario.
Yes,
as long as they don't wait too long on what they decide,
what
they want to do.
They've got the leverage now, but it's always like, how long do you maintain that leverage? How long can you hold out? Because, all it takes is, we don't know what the next college football playoff arrangement is going to look like, especially with the SEC and the Big Ten holding most of the cards right now. They could essentially come up with their own formula and just ramrod it down everybody else's throat and say like, if you don't like this, we're just going to do our own thing, and you guys can go do your thing and play the JV tournament. So it's going to be really interesting to see how long Notre Dame can hold on to that leverage and what ultimately comes out of it. Okay, so I've got another one for you now. If you had to pick one, which would you pick for Notre Dame? Now, this is for this season. You win at Ohio State, but you lose to Clemson in November, or you lose by at least 2 touchdowns to Ohio State to open the season, but then you turn around and you win against Clemson. So which of those 2 scenarios are you taking?
This one was actually a lot tougher than the first one, in my opinion, because if you win at Ohio State but lose to Clemson, I don't know if you saw it today, but Ohio State shifted from a plus 360 to a plus 320 to win the national championship. So there's a lot of things indicating that Ohio State is becoming one of the, the favorites to win the whole thing this year. Them and Alabama are the 2 kind of front runners I've seen. So to me, it's kind of catch-22. You lose or you beat Ohio State in the first game, a much better team, and then you lose to Clemson. It's almost like you would be, digressing throughout the season. But if you lose to Ohio State and beat Clemson, you're not beating as good of a team, but you're still showing some progression throughout the season. For me, it kind of plays into where I am geographically as well. I live by a lot of Ohio State fans. I live in the state of Ohio. This game has been on the schedule for a while now, and it's brought up by coworkers almost every month. It's brought up by friends almost every month. So for me, for those reasons and kind of what I was just outlining, I think winning against Ohio State and setting the tone early in the season would be more important because of, I think, the potential that Ohio State has compared to Clemson at the end of the season. I think a win against Ohio State would give them more of a resume boost, while losing to Clemson wouldn't hurt as much as long as you have that Ohio State win on your record.
Interesting. So I'm going to go the other way with this because, even though you obviously don't want to lose a lopsided game to Ohio State to open the season, I think that, especially if you build up to Clemson and you win all the rest of those games prior to Clemson, so you've only got 1 loss going into that Clemson game at home, you could kind of, because of the fact that Ohio State is such a heavy favorite and it's in Columbus, and you've got a first-time starter at quarterback, and you've got a first-time head coach and all the different stuff, I think a lot of things can be sort of written off in the court of public opinion and how you are viewed, and especially if it's not just lopsided from the get-go, now if it's one of these 45-3 or 45-10 games, maybe that's a different story. But, the question was you lose by at least 2 touchdowns. So if you're somewhat competitive throughout most of the game and it ends up being a 2-touchdown or a 17 or 20-point game at the end, maybe that's a little bit different story. But again, I think if you lose that game to open the season at Ohio State with all the different new factors that you have, a new staff working together, all these different things, new quarterback, I think it can be written off to an extent as long as you take care of your business with everything after that. And then you go into the Clemson game, and now you win that Clemson game. And especially if Clemson is as good as, because everyone thinks that Clemson's going to be, great this year, but, once again as well. So you win that, and now you're building your momentum back up again. And you can kind of, they always say, if you're going to lose, you're better off losing early on, especially to a quality team, just like they, when they lost to Georgia a couple of times. Now, granted, those games were more competitive, but so I would still take the loss at Ohio State with all those different factors. And then if you beat Clemson, you've got a chance to, again, assuming they are, like a no-loss team or a one-loss team themselves, then you're climbing back possibly into college football playoff contention, or at least you're back in New Year's Six contention, if that's the scenario that plays out. So I would take the loss by a couple touchdowns at Ohio State and then beat Clemson. And then basically you've got to clear the USC hurdle Thanksgiving weekend to end the season.
Yeah, I think, both options are still ideal, assuming my thought process was if, that's their only loss of the season, both scenarios, you're 11-1. I just like the way that a win against Ohio State looks over a win against Clemson. I think that just outweighs it a little bit just because of what I was saying about Ohio State having more of a national championship presence and probably going to be a better team than Clemson. So that's the only thing that decided it for me.
No, I mean, it makes sense. It can, because if you look at that on the other side, especially if you lose, if you beat Ohio State, that's a huge feather in your cap as heavily favored as they are, and all those factors that we just talked about. And then as long as you don't lay a complete egg against Clemson, and that's a competitive, it is going to be a home game, so you'd be losing a home game in that instance. But, you lose that game, to, again, what's at least thought of going into the season against a good Clemson team, then, maybe that win against Ohio State helps offset that. And then, again, you've still got to clear the USC hurdle, but then you need, I think, more factors, like all the style points and all that kind of stuff are going to come. That's probably going to happen, in either of those scenarios, because you've got one loss on your resume. But yeah, I think, but I've always kind of, like this game against Ohio State is, like this is before you were born, back in the late 80s and early 90s. It was Notre Dame and Michigan playing each other to open up the season. There was no warm-up act, before that. And it pretty much, like, the outcome of that game determined how your season was going to go. The winner was going to be a national championship contender. The loser was pretty much done. And that's kind of, what this sort of sets up to be a little bit with this game at Ohio State. And, and then next year, of course, it won't be to open up the season, but still it's, that's kind of what it's setting up to be. You've got two, one, what we know is going to be a really good team, against a Notre Dame team that I think, more people following Notre Dame think is going to be a pretty good team. But, there's more questions, I think, from the outside. There were questions last year, too. But it's going to be a real tone setter. I think there's no denying that going into this season, Marcus Freeman's first full season. Okay. Now I've got another one. Quentin Nelson is the number 1 rated NFL interior lineman, according to ESPN. Zach Martin is the number 2 rated interior offensive lineman in the NFL. So you played linebacker in high school and college. So when you look at these two guys, compare and contrast the skill sets of these two former Notre Dame offensive linemen, and like how you would go about trying to go up against these guys, if you had to go up against them.
In a comparison and contrast, I think I'll start with a comparison first. I think both of these guys, how they're so similar in their game is they're very, very quick twitch guys. They have good, first initial punch. They know how to get to the second level well. And I really think that their strength and their quickness overall kind of helps them for how big they are, especially a guy like Quentin Nelson. He's a large guy, but he also can get moving a little bit. So in the comparison aspect, that's how they kind of are the same. But what makes it hard for someone like myself who played linebacker is usually when in your pre-snap reads, you're reading a triangle of guard, tackle, and the running back in the backfield. And so when you have to be accountable for a center at the same time, a center who can pull, either way or fold in kind of either way, it makes things a lot harder. So I think that Quentin Nelson's skill set or Quentin Nelson's impact is a little bit higher than Zach Martin's because he, there's only one center and there's 2 guards. And like I was saying, when you're reading as a linebacker, you have a triangle where you're looking at guard, tackle in the backfield. And so when you have to put a 4th thing into your triangle, again, you're going against a team that has a center who's, quick enough to pull or, can do those sorts of things. It makes it a lot harder. And especially, on a scheme going down the line, maybe it's an outside zone that center is going to try to reach up to you and get up to you at a quick level. So I think that going against a guy like Quentin Nelson is a little bit harder than a guy like Zach Martin, but that's, we're talking about 2 all-pro, future probably Hall of Famers here. So it's, you're kind of picking needles at this point of, the differences between each two. But just because, like I was saying, Nelson plays center, it makes him a little bit more of a commodity and more that you have to worry about based on the skill set that he can provide in the run game.
Yeah, I mean, it's like pick your poison. Quentin Nelson, I think, is, he's a little bit bigger, a little bit more physical, just like he gets, like the highlights with the pancakes and all that stuff, whereas Zach Martin is more sort of the technician kind of guy out there. But I mean, you are essentially, it's like it's pretty crazy. Now, when you think about the fact that the 2 best interior linemen really since Zach Martin has been in the NFL since 2014, you've got the 2 best interior linemen, both coming from the same college and both from that Harry Heastan tree, as
And now
well.
Heastan is back, which
Yeah,
makes
that's
things
exactly
even more
right.
exciting.
That's
And
exactly right.
they keep bringing in these, just as highly touted recruits on the offensive line. So, it's almost like maybe you'd hope to see that formula start chugging through again of Harry Heastan, performing,
Cranking 'em out.
developing guys, and, the output be them having success in the NFL at a high level.
Exactly. And I think we will. I think we're going to see that for sure. Okay, so as we do this show today, Super Bowl, exactly 7 months from today, February 12th, 2023. So what's your way too early Super Bowl pick? It's going to be this team against that team. Who are you picking right now, 7 months before the Super Bowl and well before training camps even get started?
My way too early Super Bowl pick right now is the Bills versus the Rams. I like what the Bills did last year in the playoffs. I think Josh Allen is a top, you could almost say top 3 quarterback in the NFL. He had to, obviously we all know that game against the Chiefs. You know how I feel about an offense not getting a possession in overtime, especially when we're talking about,
they
the
changed
AFC
the rule for you. They changed the rule for you. You got to be happy.
Especially when we're talking about the AFC Championship. So I think, and I really like the way that defense looks for Buffalo. They kind of went through some injuries towards the end of the last season in their secondary, which I think hurt them a little bit. But if they can stay healthy and kind of put together what they did last year, I really like the Bills to kind of break through. Josh Allen is just getting better and better and better every year. And it's unfortunate that, you have a guy like Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady in the league, because you kind of get overshadowed when you're a guy like Josh Allen. But I think he's an elite quarterback. I like the way he plays. And the thing about the Rams is, they really just didn't have a lot of turnover from that Super Bowl roster last year. And I think that we will see a lot of the same things from them coming into this season as well. I think they needed to, maybe be a little bit more sound defensively. But overall, I like the way that they look going into this season as well.
Hard to repeat. It's we haven't seen it done very often, and we talked about it last year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They wanted to run it back, and Tom Brady got all those guys to come back, and Tom Brady looked like he was going to retire, and now he's back himself this year after they didn't quite make that run last year. So I'm going to say Tom Brady, a little bit more gas in the tank. Get all those guys healthy. He's still got some of the best receiving options out there. He'll lose Gronk, but Gronk was hurt, quite a bit anyway, even in his return to Tampa Bay. So I'm going to say Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, new head coach Byron Leftwich, to the Super Bowl, and the opponent will be none other than Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots. That's what it's going to be. We're going to get Brady versus Belichick one more time, and that will be Tom Brady's final game. He will beat Bill Belichick in the Super Bowl. He will ride off into the sunset, and then he will turn around and he will walk into the Fox booth and start calling games for Fox next year. So that's my Super Bowl pick. Bucks, Patriots, Belichick, Brady. They will navigate the Patriots with Mac Jones, second-year star. I know a lot of people are down on Mac Jones after last year. Let's not forget this was a rookie quarterback, and they went 10-7, 10-7. The extra game. I was trying to figure out the math in my head there real quick. 17 games, 10-7 last year. Rookie quarterback. Belichick got the guy he wanted. That's my Super Bowl man. I'm not as sold on Josh Allen and the Bills as you. Like, I think Josh Allen is a great quarterback and all that. I'm just not sure that that's a team that can really get over the hump, especially just with as tough as the AFC is to try to navigate, as we saw, last year with Cincinnati and all that. So I think that the AFC is really tough. Bill Belichick has been through those waters before. So that's my Super Bowl, my way too early Super Bowl pick.
Yeah, I think what a lot of people don't realize about, Mac Jones is he had a great season as a rookie quarterback, and they didn't even fully open the reins in the offense to him quite yet. So to have another year with the playbook and to go through, another round of OTAs and camp and all that, it's just going to make his game a little bit better. And then, I don't know if you've seen pictures of Mac Jones recently. Everyone likes to make fun of him for how he looked coming out of the draft, but
Right.
I saw a picture of him a couple weeks ago on Instagram or something, and he's looking pretty cut up. I think he's taking it pretty seriously, his off-season training. So I could definitely see Mac Jones, having an even better year than last year, and having, we all know that the Patriots are going to have a good defensive team. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the Patriots deep in the AFC and potentially in the Super Bowl.
Okay. All right. Fill in the blank. You're in Cleveland. After Baker Mayfield's trade from the Browns to the Panthers, his time in Cleveland should be remembered as blank.
His time in Cleveland should be remembered as a bright spot. Everyone, it's so weird living in this area right now because you have half the people who are like, oh, good riddance, I'm glad that Baker's gone. And then you have the more rational people who are like, hey, we haven't had a good quarterback in, at least 20 years. We get Baker Mayfield. He helps us to our first playoff win in X amount of years. He beats our arch rival Pittsburgh on their home stadium in the playoffs.
Right.
And I think it was just unfortunate. I think Baker got the best of Baker last season because he wanted to play with some pretty significant injuries. I think if he tells everyone kind of the injuries he's having and doesn't try to push it, I think he'd be in a lot different spot right now. I don't think we'd be talking about the same sort of situation. But he really wanted to, I admire his competitiveness. And I think that's something else that was taken for granted is that he's a competitor. He's a grinder. He shows up to every game. And, that was evident by, like I was saying, him playing through some pretty significant injuries last year. But it really blows my mind that, for a franchise such as Cleveland, who had a beer locker in Cleveland until they got their first win, now they get a playoff win and now they're just ready to kick him out the door. And it's very interesting to me. Like I said,
forgot about the beer locker. I forgot about that. Like you showed up and you got free beer for showing up, basically, right? Something like that.
Right. You had beers all, these beer fridges all around Cleveland that were locked up until they got their first win.
Yeah.
And then they win, and now they're open, and everyone gets free beers and all that situation. So, like I said, it's just so interesting to me that as soon as a guy leaves or has one bad year, they're just ready to kick him out. But he won a playoff game against one of their biggest rivals on their home stadium.
Do you not remember how just awful they were for a couple decades? And they were 1-30 the 2 years before they went to the playoffs. And then they go to the playoffs. And as you said, they didn't just go to the playoffs. They beat their biggest rival in a playoff game. And it's all of this is just swept under the rug. Nobody remembers any of that because then the expectations are set up high last year coming off of that playoff season. And, like you said, he tried to play through injury. I think that he was probably his own, worst enemy. If he had just put himself on the shelf and had the shoulder surgery, maybe he's still a Cleveland Brown right now, because then you don't have all that inconsistent play that came with him, trying to play with the injury. He tried to do too much, and that's because he can be his own worst enemy in that case as well. When they had some injuries, they lost, he never really did that much with OBJ anyway, but then they don't have him. They've got some injuries, tried to play too much hero ball, and, and it just, everything spiraled and it made it all worse. But, his time in Cleveland should be remembered as a time that they won a freaking playoff game after just being awful forever. And he was a big reason why they won a playoff game. So I'm really surprised that, a lot of the Baker Mayfield hate, I get it. He's polarizing. He's very opinionated. He's not going to be afraid to tell you that he's opinionated and he's passionate and all that stuff. So that can rub people the wrong way. But the guy still did something that nobody else had done in Cleveland in a long time, getting to the playoffs and winning a playoff game. So you got to give him that.
Yeah, and, they almost won a second playoff game. That game against the Chiefs and, came right down to the wire. They almost beat one of the best teams in the NFL. And I think a big side story that I'm really looking forward to is Baker Mayfield is obviously now in Carolina. Sam Darnold is now in Carolina. That's like Colin Cowherd's favorite quarterback in the NFL and least favorite quarterback in the NFL. Yeah. And so Baker Mayfield can beat out Sam Darnold. I just can't wait to hear some of the takes that our boy Colin Cowherd might have.
Yeah. That's true too. That's very true. All right, fill in the blank on this next one. It's blank that NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell says NFL Sunday Ticket will most likely leave DirecTV next year and end up with a streaming service.
This one was actually pretty tough for me. I think it's surprising that the NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell is potentially going to pull the Sunday Ticket from DirecTV and kind of make it its own standalone service. But at the end of the day, I'm excited because you and I both have been Sunday Ticket holders, and we don't really like the way that DirecTV handles the Sunday Ticket. So maybe a lot of these inconveniences and kind of errors that we see can be fixed, and maybe the price will come down a little bit. I doubt that that's the case.
Maybe.
But it's very interesting to me but I guess I'm not surprised at the end of the day because of what the NFL has done over the last few years and all the different platforms that they've kind of been going to. You have, games on Amazon, you have games on NBC, CBS, the NFL Network. There's so many different ways in which you can watch these games. I guess I'm not surprised that they're creating another avenue that's potentially going to create revenue for them. I just hope that the Sunday Ticket enhances or gets better by Roger Goodell doing this. I think that's the thing I'm most hopeful for.
Here's the thing, a couple things on going exclusively to streaming. And you've watched more games on streaming than I have. But the one that I'm less concerned about, but the one that, like a lot of people go to their wing establishments or, their bars, their sports bars, and they're watching games on Sunday, and they're able to watch all the games because the establishments have the Sunday Ticket. They're set up with DirecTV and all that. Are they going to be set up with streaming? How is that going to work? That's how they get all these bars and stuff set up for the streaming. And then two, along with that, the lag in streaming, that's something that we saw firsthand with the game that was on Peacock last season, the Notre Dame football game. There is a lag, and with buffering and stuff like that lag can be anywhere from 10 or 15 seconds, even up to 30 seconds and a minute, depending on what kind of internet service you have and all that kind of stuff. So that's, between the live sports betting and just Twitter, you're following your people at the game who are on Twitter and stuff like that. There were like spoilers that were coming out with, on that streaming Notre Dame game. So that's a big question to me. If it's exclusively on streaming, how all that stuff kind of gets rectified with so many fans dependent on that between the betting and the, following on Twitter and all those different things.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing worse than I'm guilty of this. There's nothing worse than you're on your phone, you're seeing your favorite kind of sports writers and stuff talking about the game as you're watching the game, and sometimes, like you were saying, you can be behind and they're tweeting about some crazy big touchdown that just happened, and you're 10 seconds behind. So it's definitely a potential issue, but I guess we'll kind of have to see. With everything, you kind of have to wait and see. Maybe the first couple of weeks are, more of like the testing out phase of things, or maybe they test it out during some preseason games. But as long as the product is better, that's really all I would be looking forward to, because I think that, there's so many different issues that we've run into with having the pass on DirecTV. And I'm not saying that, it's bad, because at the end of the day, we get to watch the games and everything. But I just hope that if they make this move, that the product doesn't regress.
Well, and the other thing is, are you going to be able to watch will they archive all these games, for at least a day or two? Because right now, there are a lot of times where something comes up on Sunday. So it's okay, the Cowboys are on at 1:00 or 4:30 or whatever. I'll record the game, and then I can go back and I can obviously just watch it later, just like you can with the Notre Dame game or any other game that's on live TV. You can do that. So that's probably the biggest question, out of all of it for me, is will you have the ability to either record or, go back and watch it, either after the game starts, can you watch it from the beginning? You're probably not going to be able to fast forward through commercials because, the streaming services manage to, kind of keep their own commercials in the game. You can't forward through stuff. So that's That's a big one. That's probably the biggest one for me. Just your ability to not necessarily have to watch the game live. Can you still go back and watch it either after the game starts or, after the game? Because I can watch a game. I can watch a 3 to 3.5 hour game in a little bit more than an hour. I can, you can power through the commercials and all that stuff. That's a real time saver after the fact. I don't know that we're going to be able to do that if it's on exclusively a streaming service. All right, final thing for tonight. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. It became official today. Notre Dame really got out there and made this announcement quickly with Sean Stifler from Virginia Commonwealth. He's officially today named Notre Dame's head baseball coach. Of course, replaces Link Jarrett, who's down at Florida State now. Stifler, the head coach at Virginia Commonwealth for 11 years. He won 352 games, 206 losses. Dominant in the Atlantic 10, 144-71, 3 NCAA tournament appearances, including the last 2 years where they were really good, 32-8 in the A10 over the last 2 seasons. So what do you think of this hire, Sean Stifler, Jesse?
Basically looking at his credentials and kind of looking at, where Link Jarrett came from, I think that these are very kind of similar situations, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
I really like the credentials that he has. I can't remember the exact amount of tournament appearances and the conference championships that he had, but I know when I read them that they were impressive numbers. And like I said, it just reminds me a lot of maybe like a little bit younger Link Jarrett. And I think that Notre Dame is trying to follow, kind of this path that they found for success with Link. And it was unfortunate that Link had to, depart after 3 years, but it almost became okay, what kind of, if we took a cookie cutter of who Link was, who best fits that kind of image? And I think that Stifler honestly kind of fills the majority of that cookie cutter, that role. And I'm very excited to see, where they go going forward. Unfortunately for him, Notre Dame had a lot of turnover with transfer portal and graduates and stuff. And so I think that as fans, we can't really, be expecting a whole lot out of his first season because he's got so much turnover based on the things that I just kind of said.
And, where he's taking over now, there are a lot of guys in the transfer portal right now. I think I've heard there are like 2,400 or something like that in the portal. So there's still a lot of players out there. And so it's good. I think it's probably, maybe they kind of push this hire through a little bit quicker than usual, because like, it's interesting that they were 3 years to the day. Stifler announced July 12th, 2022 as the head coach. Link Jarrett was announced July 12th, 3 years ago. But like we knew a couple weeks before Jarrett was going to be, announced as the head coach that he was going to get the job, but they went through that long vetting process that you typically have at Notre Dame that was triggered by George O'Leary several years back, like make sure you've got all your, your I's dotted and your T's crossed and all that stuff and make sure there are no discrepancies. But yeah, he's got to rebuild a roster. So he's going to have to jump into the transfer portal because, we know that as of right now, Notre Dame's potentially losing, especially guys from the pitching staff to the transfer portal. Like you, I think it's a good hire. I like the way with these last 2 hires, they've gone to successful coaches from the South, where which is where the sport is dominated, to mid-major successful coaches from the South. This guy has actually had more NCAA tournament success than even Link Jarrett had at Greensboro before he came in. So, I like this hire. He's got a pitching background, so that's good as well. But he's going to have to jump into that portal quick. That's how Link Jarrett, obviously, part of how he got this thing built back up so quickly was by jumping in to that portal himself, getting guys like John Michael Bertrand and some of these guys. And so that's what Stifler is probably going to have to do now with as much roster turnover as they've got, especially if you end up losing Finley and Rayo to the transfer, and a couple of these other guys to the transfer portal. And along those lines, what do you think, with like Finley, Rayo, these guys, Chuck Ristano and Rich Wallace, they're going to join Link Jarrett's staff down there at Florida State. Will you think of Jarrett, because there's a lot of, real shine on Link Jarrett for what he did. Super Regional last year, College World Series this year, in just 2 years, ultra successful. Will you think of him any differently if he essentially raids the Notre Dame roster and brings all these guys down south to Florida State to join him down there?
I don't necessarily think of it as raiding the roster. I think the most surprising thing is the fact that Restano is leaving Notre Dame to go down there with him. I think that's the one that not that it hurts a lot, but I understand, especially in today's age or today's game, no matter the sport at the college level with the new transfer portal rules, these are, especially a guy like Finley, he's a freshman and Link is the guy that recruited him and got him that came to Notre Dame. And
Very
so
true.
To me, I don't have a problem with following the coach that kind of recruited you and, following him down there, especially because he's so young. If he's going through and poaching out the entire roster one by one, like, hey, you want to come to Florida State? Hey, you want to come to Florida State? That's kind of where I have an issue. But when we're talking about some of these younger guys, I don't necessarily see there being an issue because of what I was just talking about. They're fresh recruits. They were sold on coming to Notre Dame because of Link Jarrett and what he was going to be able to do for them with individual and team success. That's kind of where I stand with it. Like I said, if we're talking guys who have maybe their junior or senior year and they're just about done, I think that's where I would kind of draw the line of having an issue with some of that.
Yeah, and I guess the question I would ask myself, though, or that I have asked myself, and maybe you should ask yourself, and I get it, all the things that you're talking about, and he still did do a great job here, and it just stinks that the strength of this team is pitching, and now three of their best guys, if not even four, with another freshman in there in the portal, could all, we don't know that they're all going to end up at Florida State, but when the entire Notre Dame staff is going to Florida State, including the pitching coach who made them as successful as they were, and then, as you said, just the fact that Jarrett and these guys recruited him up here, it definitely would stink, and you're in the same conference, stink to see him go down there. But what if this was Brian Kelly? Like when he went to LSU, like, would you still have sort of the same, I guess, feel for this if Brian Kelly had, like, hey, Chris Tyree, come down here with me to Florida State. J.D. Bertrand, come down here with me to Florida State, and pluck like some frontline guys, because like he got George Takis, and, Takis was a depth piece here at Notre Dame. I think he's going to have more of an opportunity down there at LSU. But, like, if Brian Kelly had done the same thing, would you feel the same way? I guess, and we don't know that, we don't know for sure that this is going to happen at Florida State. I'm just saying but go ahead.
I think this kind of comes down to the way that both of these coaches kind of departed the program. Brian Kelly kind of snuck off in the middle of the night and had a very quick meeting with his team and just said, I'm kind of out of here. And I thought Link kind of handled his situation more professionally and more more integrity. He sat down with his players and really thanked them and said, this wouldn't be possible without you guys, and my success here is ultimately, what got me this next position at Florida State. So I think him going out and saying thank you and, saying that you guys are the reason why I was able to have this opportunity, unlike Brian Kelly, who's kind of more of a selfish manner of, when he wins, he wants all the credit, but when he loses, he wants to blame everyone else. Uh-huh. I think that's a large factor in this situation of, good points. I think that, I would be a little bit more upset with Brian Kelly because of the things that I just kind of, outlined. I just think that Link was a man of his integrity. The fact more that genuine. Yeah, he went through the College World Series. Whether this is true or not, he told everyone, I'm gonna wait to see how this goes because I owe it to this team and everything that we've worked for before we talk about anything else. So I just don't think I would have felt the same way with Brian Kelly, but I also think that Link as a man and integrity is at a different level than Brian Kelly. So
all excellent points. We will just end it on that. Great points, great rebuttal. We will finish with that. Jess, enjoy your trip to Arizona. Be safe down there and don't come back too sunburned when it's all said.
I was going to say, everyone take a picture of me now, and then when I get back next week, let's see how disheveled I look.
That's right.
compared to now. I might be recovering still, but I appreciate you having me, and I enjoyed all the topics today.
Yep, good stuff. Good stuff today from you as well. All right, so we'll wrap it up with that. Ivy Nation Sports Talk. Jesse Styers checking out, and we've got a couple more shows coming up this week. Vince will be back tomorrow. Bobby Hensley back in the house on Thursday as well. Don't forget, like us, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us, comment, rate on all the audio podcast platforms as well. We will talk to you mañana on IB Nation Sports Talk. Great to have you.